My name is Carl, and for 32 years, I was the head janitor at Westbrook Corporate Center. I had mopped every hallway, fixed every stubborn light fixture, and unlocked every door long before most employees even poured their first coffee. I thought I knew that building better than anyone, and I thought the people inside it knew me too. That's why when my retirement party came, I expected at least a small crowd. Maybe a few heartfelt speeches, a slice of cake, a handshake from the boss. Instead, when I walked into the rented hall that Saturday afternoon, the only thing waiting for me was the sight of empty tables and cold, untouched finger sandwiches. Not a single person from the office had shown up, not my boss, not the front desk staff, not even the folks from the late shift who always promised I was like family. My name was on a banner drooping above the buffet, but the chairs under it were still neatly tucked in. The janitor's retirement had apparently been an event no one could fit into their schedule. I stood there, hands shoved into my pockets, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. My niece, who had helped me set everything up, gave me an awkward smile. "Maybe they're running late," she said softly, glancing at her watch, but I already knew where they were. The office manager, Don, was retiring the same week, and someone had decided his send-off should be today too. His party was across town at the country club. They had given him speeches, a gold watch, and apparently the attendance of the entire office. I'd heard the whispers in the break room all week. "We'll just go to Don's. It's the real party." I forced myself to take a seat and pick at a plate of cold pasta salad. My niece tried to keep the mood light, telling me stories about her kids, but every so often I'd glance toward the door, hoping someone might still walk in. No one did. The hurt wasn't just about the empty chairs, it was about what it said. 32 years of cleaning up after people, of fixing their messes before they even noticed, and the moment I stepped away, I was forgettable. After about an hour, I told my niece she could go. No point in keeping her hostage to my humiliation. I started stacking plates, more out of habit than anything else. As I was bagging up the untouched cake, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A new message from my boss: "We need to talk, urgently." Before I could even process that, I noticed something else. 45 missed calls, every single one from Dawn. My pulse spiked. I'd been keeping my phone on silent, trying not to obsess over it during the party, but 45 calls meant something was wrong. My first thought was an accident, maybe a fire, maybe a flood, and if Dawn was calling me, that meant the building, my building. I stepped outside into the crisp evening air and hit redial. Don answered on the first ring, his voice panicked. "Carl, thank God, we've got a situation, big one." "What happened?" I asked, already heading toward my truck. My body might have been retired, but my instincts weren't. "It's the executive floor. There's water everywhere. The sprinklers went off for no reason, and no one knows how to shut them down. The new night crew, they've never handled anything like this. We need you here, now." I froze with my hand on the door handle. The executive floor was carpeted in custom wool, with hand-carved wood desks that probably cost more than my annual salary. A sprinkler incident could mean hundreds of thousands in damage, and after 32 years, I was the only one who knew where the emergency shutoff valve was hidden. I'd kept that knowledge tucked away because, well, when you're invisible, a little leverage keeps you from being disposable. "I thought you had it handled," I said, my voice calm, almost cold. After all, I wasn't worth inviting to the big send-off. There was a pause on the other end, the sound of muffled chaos in the background. Don's tone shifted from panic to pleading. "Carl, please, if we don't get this water stopped, it's going to ruin the place. The insurance won't cover it if it's deemed negligence. You're the only one who can." "That's funny," I cut in, because I could have sworn I was nobody to this office. Nobody worth a handshake or a goodbye. Another pause. This time he dropped his voice. "Look, I'm sorry about the party. That wasn't right, but if you ever cared about this place." I hung up before he could finish. My hands weren't shaking from anger. They were steady, too steady, because for the first time I realized just how much power I had in this situation. The hall's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I slid into my truck and sat there for a moment, thinking. 32 years of being overlooked, dismissed, and treated like part of the furniture. They hadn't just skipped my party, they had told me exactly where I stood in their eyes. And now they needed me more than ever. I turned the key in the ignition, but I did. Point my truck toward the office. I had a better idea. Something that would make sure they remembered exactly who Carl the janitor was and why you never, ever take the person holding the keys for granted. I didn't head for the corporate center. Instead, I drove to my small storage unit on the edge of town. Most folks assumed it was just a place I kept old furniture and tools I didn't have room for at home. In reality, it was my personal archive of 3 decades, worth of building schematics, maintenance logs, spare keys, and let's call them insurance files. Every time someone in management tried to cut corners or cover up a costly mistake, I kept notes. When contractors did shoddy work that passed inspection only because someone greased the right palms, I kept copies of the paperwork. And when I was told to just patch it up instead of fixing it properly, I documented that too. I parked, unlocked the roll-up door, and flipped on the dim overhead light. My filing cabinet sat along the back wall, each drawer neatly labeled. There it was, Drawer 2B, Plumbing and Sprinkler Systems. I slid it open and pulled out the master folder for the executive floor. Inside was a laminated diagram of the sprinkler system, complete with the location of the shutoff valve that only I and the original building engineer had ever known about. The engineer had retired 20 years ago. I was the last man standing who could stop that water. I stood there, folder in hand, thinking about all the times I'd been told to enter through the service door instead of the lobby, so the important clients wouldn't see me. I thought about the Christmas bonuses that shrank every year while management threw lavish parties for themselves. I thought about the time they cut my overtime pay to save costs, but found money to renovate the break room with an espresso bar. And now, because Don's party was more glamorous than mine, they were standing ankle-deep in water, waiting for me to swoop in like some kind of loyal dog. My phone buzzed again, this time my boss. I let it ring out, then checked the voicemail. "Carl, I know you're upset, but please, the damage is bad. I'll double your severance if you come in tonight. Just don't let this get worse." Double my severance. Now that was interesting. It told me one thing: they were desperate. But I wasn't about to trade 32 years of being overlooked for a quick payout. This was bigger than money. This was about making them understand that the janitor, the guy they barely noticed, was the one holding the whole place together. I grabbed the folder and a small black duffel bag from another shelf. Inside the bag were a few specialty tools they'd never bothered to buy for the new crew because Carl can handle it. Wrench sets, valve keys, and a portable pump. If I walked into that building with these tools, I could stop the flood in under 5 minutes. Without them, they'd be tearing up floors for weeks. I locked the storage unit and slid into my truck again. The country club was only 15 minutes away, and I had a feeling Don's farewell bash hadn't wrapped up yet. If they wanted my help, they were going to have to ask me face to face, in front of everyone. When I pulled into the parking lot, I could hear the music before I even stepped out. Inside, the banquet hall was warm and golden, the kind of place they'd never have rented for me. The air smelled of roast beef and expensive wine. I spotted them immediately. My boss, the HR director, a cluster of department heads, and of course Don himself in the middle of it all, holding court like a king. The same people who couldn't spare an hour for my retirement were here, laughing, clinking glasses, oblivious to the chaos downtown. It didn't take long for my boss to spot me. Relief flashed across her face, and she hurried over, the smile on her lips not reaching her eyes. "Carl, thank God you're here. I held up the duffel bag. Executive floors flooding. Sprinklers went off, I heard. She nodded rapidly. Yes, it's a disaster. Please, we need you to shut it down. You're the only one who knows how." I tilted my head toward Don, still basking in the glow of his send-off. Funny thing, I had my own party today, didn't see any of you there. Her expression faltered. Carl, that wasn't intentional, the scheduling. Wasn't a mistake, I cut in. You made it clear where I stand. The room was starting to quiet, nearby guests catching enough of our exchange to go silent. A few heads turned. My boss lowered her voice. Please, we can talk about this later. Right now, the damage. Damage, I repeated, is what happens when you ignore the people who keep the place running. Maybe you'll remember that next time. Don approached, his brow furrowed. Carl, buddy, come on. Let's put the past aside and fix this before the board finds out. I'll make sure they know you saved the day. I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. You don't get to call me buddy, and I'm not walking into that building until I know the people upstairs will finally respect the ones doing the real work. That's when I laid out my terms, loud enough for half the room to hear. 3 months, paid consulting contract at double my old rate, full authority to train and manage the new crew my way, and a public statement from management acknowledging my years of service on company letterhead, not in some throwaway email. My boss looked like she'd swallowed glass. Don opened his mouth to argue, but before he could, a junior manager rushed in, breathless. It's worse, the water's leaking into the server room. The server room, the heartbeat of the company. Without those servers, every client file, every project, every billing record could be gone in minutes. I could see the panic ripple through them. Fine, my boss said through clenched teeth. You have a deal. I held up a hand, put it in writing, now. I wasn't going anywhere until that paper was signed. Not after 32 years of being treated like the help. Tonight, they were going to learn exactly who kept their empire standing. They didn't waste time. Someone cleared off a side table, and the HR director pulled a laptop from her bag. My boss typed furiously, her eyes darting between me and the screen. Every so often, she'd glance toward the door as if the flooding might burst through it at any moment. I stayed put, leaning on the duffel bag like I had all the time in the world. Don hovered nearby, trying to act casual, but the twitch in his jaw gave him away. Carl, he said, forcing a smile, you've got to understand, we didn't mean to disrespect you. It's just my party was already on the calendar and everyone decided I didn't matter. I finished for him. That's fine, Don. I've been invisible to you for years. I've patched your mistakes without so much as a thank you. But tonight, you need me more than I need you. He didn't argue. That was the thing about leverage. When you had it, you didn't need to raise your voice. A few minutes later, my boss slid the laptop toward me. The document was short, but every word mattered. Consulting rate, length of contract, authority over training, public acknowledgement. I read it twice, then pulled a pen from my pocket, because a good janitor always has one and signed. She did the same, her signature tight and fast. Happy? She asked. I zipped the duffel bag shut, ecstatic. The room seemed to exhale as I turned toward the door. Outside, the night air was cool against my face. I climbed into my truck, the signed paper tucked neatly into my jacket pocket. The drive to the corporate center was quiet except for the occasional buzz of my phone, missed calls from the frantic new night crew. When I pulled into the parking garage, I could already hear the faint hiss of the sprinklers echoing through the concrete. Upstairs, the executive floor was chaos. Water pooled across the plush carpet, soaking the legs of antique desks. The new janitors were running back and forth with mops and buckets, useless against the steady spray from the ceiling. One of them spotted me and practically sagged with relief. Carl, thank God, we can't find the shutoff valve. Of course you can't, I said, stepping around them. No one's touched it in 20 years. I headed straight for the far corner of the floor, where a decorative wooden panel covered a recess service hatch. Most people assumed it was part of the wall's design. I popped it open, revealing a narrow crawl space. Inside, the brass valve gleamed under my flashlight. I twisted it slowly, listening as the hiss faded and the sprinklers sputtered to a stop. The room fell into a heavy, dripping silence. Every eye was on me. "That's how it's done," I said simply, wiping my hands on a rag. My boss arrived minutes later, heels clicking on the soaked floor. She surveyed the damage with a grim expression. "You just saved us hundreds of thousands," she said quietly. I gave her a polite nod. "You're welcome." But I wasn't done. "Where's the server room?" I asked. She pointed toward the back hallway. Water seeped in. "It's in there now, trying to assess." I was already moving. The server room's outer wall had a slow drip coming from the ceiling tiles, pooling dangerously close to a rack of power units. I grabbed the portable pump from my bag, setting it to work while I pulled a roll of industrial plastic from the shelf. Within minutes, I had rigged a temporary barrier to divert the water into a floor drain. The IT manager, pale and sweating, muttered something about me being a miracle worker. "No miracle," I said, "just 32 years of knowing this place better than anyone else." By the time the worst of the water was gone, it was well past midnight. My shirt was damp, my knees ached, but the job was done. The executive floor was a mess, but it would survive. As I packed up my tools, my boss approached again. "Carl, about tonight. I want you to know I regret how things were handled with your retirement. It wasn't fair." I shrugged. "What matters is you remember this moment the next time someone says the janitor's not important." She nodded slowly. "I will." I believed her, not because she'd suddenly developed a conscience, but because she'd just learned what it cost to overlook the wrong person. I left the building with my duffel bag slung over my shoulder and the signed contract still warm in my pocket. Outside, the night was quiet, but inside me something had shifted. For years, I'd kept my head down, thinking hard work would speak for itself. Tonight proved it didn't. You had to make people hear you. And I had no intention of ever being ignored again. I didn't sleep much that night. Even after a hot shower, the sound of water dripping from the executive ceiling kept replaying in my mind. Not because I was worried about the damage, I'd handled that, but because I kept seeing their faces when I'd walked into the country club. Shock, guilt, and most importantly, realization. For the first time in decades, they'd seen me as more than the guy who emptied their trash. The next morning, I went back to the corporate center. Not because they called, but because I wanted to take inventory of just how bad the damage was. When I stepped onto the executive floor, the place reeked of damp carpet and industrial fans. A crew from a restoration company was already hauling in dehumidifiers. The new janitors nodded at me with something like respect. Respect I'd never seen before. In the middle of the chaos, Don appeared. His suit jacket was wrinkled, and he had dark circles under his eyes. "Carl," he said, almost sheepishly, "I wanted to thank you for last night. I know things didn't go right at the party." I looked at him evenly. "Didn't go right. Don, I sat in an empty hall while you gave a speech about teamwork to a room full of people who couldn't be bothered to show up for me." He winced. "I know, and I can't change that. But I can tell you I've always respected your work." "Respected enough to put my party on the calendar next to yours?" I asked. He didn't answer, and that told me everything. I moved past him, heading for the maintenance office. My nameplate was still on the door, but the desk had been cleared, probably by one of the new hires trying to make it their space. I dropped my duffel bag on top and started flipping through the old maintenance request log. The entries were almost comical. Water stain on TH floor ceiling, fixed by Carl. AC outage, Carl restored in 5 minutes. Elevator stuck, Carl freed passengers. 32 years of problems solved without fanfare. and now, the people in charge finally knew what it meant to lose that. My phone buzzed, a text from the HR director. "Carl, can you attend a meeting with the board this afternoon? They want to discuss your consulting role." I smiled to myself. A meeting with the board wasn't something janitors got invited to, ever. That afternoon, I walked into the conference room wearing the only suit I owned, a gift from my niece for special occasions. The board members were already seated, their expressions polite but tense. My boss gestured for me to sit. "We just want to acknowledge," she began, "that your actions last night prevented a major catastrophe. The servers alone, if they'd gone down, we might have lost millions in client contracts." One of the older board members leaned forward. "It's clear we've underestimated the importance of long-term institutional knowledge. People like you, Carl, are the backbone of this company." I let them talk, nodding occasionally, but I wasn't there for compliments. I waited until they were finished before speaking. "My contract is signed. You've got me for 3 months. In that time, I'll train your night crew, map every shutoff valve, and make sure no one has to call me in a panic again. But I'm also going to change a few things." A murmur went around the table. I continued. "First, your janitorial staff isn't invisible anymore. They get proper introductions to every department head. They're invited to the same appreciation events as everyone else. And when they hit milestones, 5 years, 10 years, retirement, you show up. Not just in an email, but in person." One of the board members looked uncomfortable. "That's unconventional for our culture." "Your culture nearly flooded your top floor last night," I replied. "Maybe it's time it changed." There was silence for a moment. Then my boss said, "Agreed." And just like that, it was policy. When the meeting ended, I walked out knowing I'd just done something bigger than fixing a broken pipe. I'd made sure the people coming after me wouldn't be treated like shadows. My years in the background had given me one advantage. They'd never seen me as a threat, which made it easy to change things right under their noses. That night, as I locked up my storage unit, I pulled out the signed contract one more time. 3 months of double pay, full control over my own program, and the knowledge that the next time the company threw a farewell party, the janitor wouldn't be sitting alone. It wasn't revenge in the flashy sense, no ruined careers, no lawsuits, but it was the kind that lasted, the kind that made people remember, and remembering was all I ever wanted from them. The next few weeks moved fast. Word spread through the building about the night the janitor saved the executive floor, and suddenly everyone, from interns to senior partners, was greeting me in the halls. Some were genuine, others were clearly doing damage control. I didn't care which. Respect, whether earned from admiration or fear, was still respect. The first change I made as a consultant was simple but powerful: visibility. I took the entire janitorial staff, day shift and night, on a walkthrough of the executive floor during business hours. Suits and ties paused mid-conversation as I introduced each cleaner by name. "This is Jerome. He's the one who makes sure your office AC doesn't choke during heat waves. That's Leela. She's the one who kept the break room functional when the plumbing went out last winter." Watching the executives shake their hands told me the point had landed. I also opened the maintenance logs to the entire company. Every time my team fixed something, it was recorded in a shared file. Within a month, employees were leaving thank you notes for the crew instead of assuming magic elves made problems disappear overnight. Don avoided me for the first 2 weeks. Then one afternoon, he caught me by the elevators. "Carl, I owe you another apology. I should have been at your party. I let ego get in the way." I studied him for a moment. His suit was still sharp, his voice smooth, but his eyes had the look of someone who'd been forced to eat a slice of humble pie. "Apology accepted," I said, "but remember, respect is shown in the small things. You want to make it right, show up for people before you need something from them. He nodded, and I believed he meant it, maybe just a little. By the end of the first month, the night crew was running like a well-oiled machine. I'd walked them through every hidden valve, breaker, and bypass in the building. They had their own laminated maps now, copies locked in multiple locations. If another disaster happened, they wouldn't have to call anyone in a panic. The final part of my contract came sooner than expected, a formal appreciation event for the entire facilities team. HR booked the same hall they'd used for Don's farewell, but this time the spotlight was on the people in coveralls, not suits. My name was called first, and I walked up to the podium to a round of applause that, for once, didn't feel forced. I kept my speech short. 32 years ago, I started here with a mop in my hand and no idea how much this building would become part of my life. I've seen every leak, every flickering light, every midnight emergency. But the truth is, buildings aren't kept standing by one person, they're kept standing by a team, and that team deserves the same recognition as anyone in the corner office. The applause that followed was loud, real, and more satisfying than any gold watch could have been. When the evening ended, I lingered near the back as people filed out. My boss approached, smiling in a way that seemed almost proud. "You've changed things here, Carl, more than I expected." "Good," I said, "that was the point." As I left the hall, I felt lighter than I had in years. Retirement wasn't the end I thought it would be, it was a beginning. I still had my tools, my knowledge, and now my voice. They might not have shown up for me that first night, but they'd never forget my last months here. And as for Don, he sent me a photo a week later, him at his new place, standing ankle-deep in water after a pipe burst. Underneath, he'd typed one line, "Wish you were here." I didn't reply, "Some lessons you just let soak in." Never underestimate the people who keep things running when no one's watching. My story isn't just about revenge, it's about respect earned the hard way. If you believe every role deserves recognition, subscribe and join me for more true stories of grit, dignity, and unexpected power in ordinary places.